I'm going to talk to you today about making effective presentations. It's estimated that there are over 30 million presentations with accompanying PowerPoint made every year in the United States. And it's my experience with the number of PowerPoints that I'm exposed to that a good 2/3 of those PowerPoints are totally ineffective. So I'm going to talk about the use, the misuse, and the abuse of PowerPoint. And as a little aside, I'm also going to tell you that in some of the most important power circles where major decisions of great import are made, they don't use PowerPoint. Flip charts maybe, and a marker. So don't tie yourself to the idea that you have to have a PowerPoint to be an effective presenter. But if you do make the decision to use PowerPoint, understand that PowerPoint is a tool. It's not an end in itself. Bob Hope said, never do stand-up comedy with dogs and kids. And of course, the reason for that is absolutely logical. A dog or a kid will steal the show. PowerPoint can do the same thing, and it can even do more than that. Not only can it steal the show, but it can make you look very inept and unprofessional. So we're going to talk about effective presentations and give you some guidelines and some pointers that I think will be very helpful for you. Number one, if you're a presenter, make sure that you have picked a topic or a subject that you know a lot about and that you are interested in. The other thing to remember is that you must connect with your audience. You must explain in your opening why your audience needs to care about what you're presenting. You also need to remember Stephen Covey's axiom, begin with the end in mind. You must be able to articulate, write down specifically what you want your audience to do, believe, know, or act on when you finish presenting. You want to outline the major points that you're going to be making with your audience, and you want to do your homework and research supporting points that make sense. It's important that you do at least two things when you're preparing for your presentation. Memorize your opening. Know exactly what you're going to say when you stand up in front of that audience. It'll give you confidence. I mean, word for word. Memorize what you're going to say. And memorize your closing. And we can talk about notes and what notes should look like for you. And a lot of speech coaches have a variety of explanations for what we should do with notes. My instructions for you is to decide what works for you and what allows you to be comfortable. If you can use a computer with your notes in front of you on the computer, that works beautifully, projected on the screen. If you need 4x6 cards, if you need your script completely written out, these are individual choices that you need to make about the use of notes. The notes should not be distracting and should not take away from you in any way. You should look polished and professional at all times. So whatever you need to do about notes so that you look professional, that's your decision to make. The other thing that I watch a great deal in presentations is the way people introduce themselves. Invariably, people are introduced by the host or the speaker, and they're invited to come up and speak. And the host will have introduced them by name, and they will stand up in front of the audience, and the first thing they'll say is, "Hi, my name's Priscilla Baird," just when they've been introduced. So again, another reason to absolutely memorize your first words. And I think it's a danger if you kibitz with the audience or you try to draw on the moment. Now, some professional speakers are able to do that because of their personality, and they do it well. I don't recommend it for effective presentations. I think you need to have your introduction memorized, and that's your starting point. You want to emphasize the major points in your presentation. The reason that we use PowerPoint is that it increases retention 14 to 38%. That's the reason we put it into black and white before an audience. They will retain it longer. So it's a great teaching tool, and it's a big help in aiding a group come to consensus. It also reduces the amount of time that it takes for a professional presentation, because a speaker will stay on point if they have the bullets in place. And it also makes sure that you're going to reach your goals. It increases reaching consensus by about 21%. Make sure that you say to yourself, at the end of my presentation, the audience will think, believe, do, or act in this manner. Also, think about what your audience is going to say when they leave the room. Formulate in your own mind, when they walk out the door and someone says to them, what went on in there? That they have one thing that you have left in their mind that they can repeat easily. And never forget, if you are able to connect with your audience in a way that makes them care about what you're saying, you will have won. You want to analyze your audience in terms of demographics, the educational level, the experience they have, and their level of expectation. You have to know your audience, and you have to tailor your presentation to your audience. And you have to decide why your topic is important to them. Why should they care about it? It's also important for every presenter to think about the space that they're in. You have to control the space that you're in, and you do that with a style, a presence, and a power that you need to develop as a presenter. You need to think about, is it cold? Is it hot? Is the lawnmower outside? Is there enough light in the room? Where am I on the program? Am I at the beginning or after lunch when they're sleepy? How will the room be arranged? And if you can control how the room is arranged, that is a very powerful thing. Circles are best, always. Straight lines, not so good. People tend to have a more convivial spirit and attitude when they're in a circle. So if you can control the way the room is set up, it becomes a plus for you as a presenter. And the old Dale Carnegie adage is as powerful today as it was when he created it in the 50s. You want to tell your audience what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them that you told them. It's the pattern that every polished professional follows. You want to be careful to avoid redundancies in your presentation, and make sure that each point is given a sufficient amount of time so that the audience, so that it seeks in to the audience. Okay, now what about introductions? What's good introduction? Well, audiences love a great story. So if you know a story and you can think that it's a great segue into your presentation, it's a very effective attention getter to begin with a story. Plus, usually as a presenter, you're going to be very much at ease with telling a story. The other thing that audiences love, they love shock. So that if you can quote them a vital statistic that is shocking, it really gets their attention. The other thing that audiences love is they love experts. So if you can quote an expert with a name that's fairly recognizable, it gives credibility to your presentation. If you're going to use humor, I advise you to be really careful and play the humor out many times before you actually use it with an audience. Humor is a very difficult thing. Much easier to play tragedy than comedy. So I warn you about humor. I'm not very funny. I don't use humor. It doesn't work for me. I can be sarcastic all the day long, but I don't even try humor. But if you have the kind of personality for which it works, audiences like it, and it can be an icebreaker. So your introduction has to capture your audience's attention. You establish rapport with them. You make sure they know your purpose and that your major points are very much articulated. The body of your presentation has to provide support for what your thesis was. It's also a really good idea to include what I call markers in your introduction. And that means that you'll give your audience some kind of numerical clue about how long they're going to be asked to pay attention. Like the 5 major points that'll be made today, the 3 major issues presented. Audiences want to love you. Believe me, they want to love you. They want you to be, when you stand up in front of an audience, they want you to be okay. Because if you're okay, they can be okay. If you're not okay, they're going to feel miserable. So trust me, as terrifying as oral presentations can be, the audience needs for you to succeed. And they want to stay with you. But they also would like a clue, like how long are we going to stay with you? So markers in the introduction really make an audience very comfortable. Okay, this person's now on number 5 and there are only 7 points, so I know I only have to hang in there for 2 more points. So your body presents supporting information. You make sure that you have all the relevant statistics there. Quotes from very famous people help. And the stories and the visuals that you're going to use with your PowerPoint. Make sure that you place yourself to the side of your PowerPoint so that you're able to look at your audience and that you don't make the deadly mistake of turning around to your PowerPoint, turning your back on your audience, and pointing to the PowerPoint. If I had a nickel for every time that I had watched someone in a professional setting turn their back, come in front of the light, and point to the PowerPoint. Everyone has a pointer, a laser pointer, which you can use. I wouldn't overuse it, but if you need to point to a graph or a chart, a statistic, you can use the laser pointer. But never, ever use your finger and turn your back on your audience. You've disconnected. You have totally disconnected from your audience when you turn your back on them. And it's a sign of nervousness. It's a sign of not being prepared. It's a sign that you aren't really interested in relating to your audience and you want to hurry up and get this over with. So yes, I'm going to turn my back. Avoid it at all costs. When you are talking to an audience, you're using technical language, acronyms, try to make sure that you interpret it for your audience. Your vocabulary needs to be simple and direct when you are an oral presenter. Audiences do not respond to the overuse of technical information. They don't digest it very well. So you want to make sure that you use simple vocabulary, short sentences, and it's important to sound conversational and to be relaxed. Remember that the spoken word is much more difficult to process than written communication. So you want to help your audience by being conversational and by using sentences that are short and not complex. You want to avoid the jargon and the technical terms. Your audiences will not like you if you use terms they do not understand. You have memorized your conclusion, and you want to make sure that that conclusion is creative and memorable. Audiences will remember the last thing that you tell them. So this is your opportunity to make a memorable statement. And you want to make sure that the closing ties back to the introduction and that they're very clear that there's closure. Too many presenters start and stop. You want to introduce and conclude. And there's a difference. Presenters who are not prepared, who do not memorize their introduction, invariably stand up in front of the audience and say, okay, here goes. And the other thing that they say is, okay, that's it. So to be an effective presenter, it's essential that you've memorized and cleverly designed your introduction so that the audience cares and that you created a closing that brings closure to them that's very creative. You also want to smile, accept your audience's applause, and remember, never say thank you. Why? Because the audience should be thanking you. You are a presenter. You have a moral obligation to have value added to that audience when you take something from them that they can never get back their time. So you have been well prepared. You had something worthwhile to say. And now the audience should thank you. So remember, thank you is not an effective closing for oral presentations. You need to limit the number of slides that you use, and these are the rules. Probably no more than 7 to 10 slides for a 12-minute presentation. You want to limit the number of images per slide, one idea per slide, only one idea per slide. You want to be very careful with your choice of font and color. Nobody can read purple on black. You want to make sure that the audience can see the font from the back of the room. Test it out. I mean, I've been in auditoriums where audiences would be so rude that they would put their hand over their heads watching a PowerPoint trying to demonstrate that they couldn't read it or see it. Audiences can be vicious. Make sure, because you've made them uncomfortable. They're reacting. They can't see something that they're expected to see. So make sure that your audience can see the font from the back of the room, that the color scheme is acceptable and that it can be easily read, and that it has some appeal. Okay, bullets. The rule about bullets. There should be, the first letter of every bullet should be capitalized. There should never be a period. You should never write a sentence on a PowerPoint. Can I say that again? Never write a sentence on a PowerPoint. A bullet is a phrase, okay? Not a sentence. Never use abbreviations. So the first word of every bullet is capitalized. And this is the rest of it. It needs to be grammatically parallel. The first word of every bullet needs to match in grammar pattern, grammatically parallel. So if we start with verbs, we need to continue the bullets with verbs. If we start with adjective noun, then the pattern needs to continue with adjective noun. So we have the first letter of the bullet capitalized, and we have it in grammatical parallelism, no periods, only phrases. The title of every slide should explain exactly what is on that slide. Title should be self-explanatory and stand alone. For example, if I have a slide that I'm creating and talking about humor in oral presentations, I am not going to use as my title just the word humor. I will say something like the value of humor, so that the title becomes complete and self-explanatory. So, self-explanatory titles, bullets, not complete sentences, phrases, first word capitalized, grammatical parallelism. And there should only be no more than 4 bullets per slide. 4 bullets per slide, and no more than 6 to 7 words per bullet. Got it? 4 bullets per slide, 6 to 7 words per bullet. Of course, make sure that you proofread very carefully, have someone else proofread. Nothing will destroy your credibility any more than to have a misspelled word. It's just not acceptable in the professional arena. The other thing is to remember that everything that you put in writing has legal and ethical ramifications. Make sure that you are mindful of all of that when you put your information together. I personally like the idea of having a source slide. If I have made a presentation that is full of statistical information for my company and they are going to make a decision based on the information that I am presenting in my slideshow, I want a source slide. Now, I may not use it, but I have it. And so I have all of my sources for data on one slide written in APA style, American Psychological Association style. The other thing that's really a good idea is if you have statistics and data from a particular source, it's a good idea to actually source the slide in a very small font so that if you have information from the Labor Bureau of Statistics or from the Security Exchange Commission, you can put source and identify it. It makes that slide much more authentic. It makes your presentation much more authentic. And people like to see the sourcing. It validates your information. So make sure that you make your slides interesting and that you have a mood that you are creating with your slides, that your designs are aesthetically pleasing and effective. Never use more than 3 fonts, and I really think that's a bit much. Make sure that you never use more than 3 and that the fonts are sturdy and readable from the back of the room, and that you only change the font when you are changing your message to some extent and shifting. So I would also talk a little bit about handouts. There are 2 schools of thought, and the 2 schools of thought is that you don't give anything out to your audience until you're completely finished with your presentation, because they will rummage through it and not pay attention to you. The other idea is that if we give out the slides in advance, the audience has a chance to make notes and to follow along with the slides. I personally like the latter. I like for my audience to have the slides in advance, and I like to give them out to begin with. But I think it's important that you make yourself comfortable. And the objective is to always look good before your audience and to look professional. So if you think you can arrange for your audience to have the slides distributed, a copy of the slides distributed, and you're going to look okay doing it, and it'll be a smooth process, then do it in advance. If not, save it for the handouts to be picked up at the end of the presentation. Remember, at the end of the day, you want to look like a practicing professional. One of the things that I say to my students and my clients is that there's nothing worse that could happen to you than for you to walk in a room and have no one notice. And there's nothing more wonderful that anybody could say about you at the end of the day than to say they were really a professional. And so those are your goals when you are presenting before an audience. That the audience recognizes you as a very powerful person, that they relate to you, and that at the end of the presentation they will find everything that you did and said to be the total professional package. Any questions? You have my contact information, and you can send me emails and I'll respond and talk to you about creating your own professional presentations.